This is Sam Black with Drafting Archetypes, and today I'm going to talk about my March the Machine first impressions. Unusually, the notes are not available at patreon.com/draftingarchetypes today because I have not taken any. I am 9 hours into streaming the early access event on Arena. So I've drafted whatever number of times I had time for, and I've played with the set for 9 hours. And so I'm going to talk about my impressions of the set so far. So, first and foremost, I think that this is a set that, as the mechanics pretty clearly indicate, getting onto the battlefield as soon as possible is of the utmost importance. That's been true in most limited sets for the last year plus, and with battles to fight over and convoke as a pretty important mechanic in the set, that is at least as true as it has been. I'm reasonably interested in most creatures that cost 1 mana just to start getting creatures into play immediately. And I'm generally interested in curving out and not interested in stumbling. As a result, I believe that I generally will prefer to play 2-color decks. However, this set does have a lot of weird, powerful gold cards and a decent amount of fixing, so I don't think multicolor decks are unplayable, and I wouldn't be surprised if I find myself drawn to them at some point in this format. However, I don't think that you should go into multicolor without a very good reason. I think that you really need to be getting paid off with high rarity powerful cards to justify having a mana base that will stop you from simply curving out as frequently as possible. I think that it's really easy to get ahead and stay ahead if you can just, curve out 1, 2, 3 or whatever, and then start playing and resolving battles or convoking stuff. I've been pretty impressed, unsurprisingly, with combat tricks. The existence of battles, of course, makes blocking more common because, of course, a creature connecting with a battle has a more immediate impact than a creature connecting with a player's life total when they're at 17 or whatever. And so when a creature is attacking a battle, it often behooves the opponent to try to block, creating opportunities for either player to use combat tricks. Notably, I have found Aerial Boost, that's 1 and a white for an instant with Convoke, and target creature gets +2/+2 and gains flying until end of turn, to be pretty impressive just in terms of its ability to kill a creature while you're tapped out when your opponent, thinks you can't really do anything. Like if you just play a creature, play another creature, tap out for a creature, your opponent maybe attacks with a flyer, and then you tap 2 of your creatures to aerial boost your last creature, and you block and their flyer dies, and trading a card in hand and no mana for a creature that is in play and attacking you is more or less always a good exchange. So it's an example of how Convoke can be pretty powerful. And in addition to Convoke and Battle, Backup, the mechanic that allows you to put a +1/+1 counter or n +1/+1 counters on another creature and then graft some text onto them for the turn, is another mechanic that makes the set more aggressive, both because putting a counter on a creature that can attack, your opponent's often going to choose to put that counter somewhere that gives them an attack where they didn't previously have one. And then also the grafted text gives abilities only on your turn, meaning you need to engage in combat to get something out of them. So any deck with a lot of backup is in the market to attack. For those of you who are hoping for a slower format than Phyrexia All Will Be One, there are some saving graces here. Battles, of course, if your plan is to flip a battle, then you have essentially given your opponent some life as a free gift in exchange for whatever you're getting out of the backside of the battle. And the fact that you are, devoting some of your attack steps to attacking objects that aren't your opponent means that, players functionally start with a little bit more life. Whereas when people sometimes die to poison, they functionally start with a little bit less life. So that means that the game has the opportunity to go a little bit longer, so you can at least cast some more expensive spells. I think that what we're going to see with the way in which battles and convoke and stuff lead you to play to the board is that the games are going to last more turns, but they might be largely decided before they're over because someone will get way ahead before the game actually ends because of the extra value they've gotten from convoke and from resolving their battles. However, the fact that the game hasn't actually ended means that there's more of a chance for really high impact rares, sweepers, even high impact commons like Alabaster Host Intercessor, the 6 mana white 3/4 with plane cycling that exiles a creature an opponent controls when it enters the battlefield, as long as you control it, has the opportunity to recover and swing the game back in your favor. And the fact that your life total is a little bit less consistently and directly pressured means that you're going to get a little bit more chance than you would in a format like Phyrexial V1 to play some of that more expensive stuff. So while I think that you want to focus on having a bunch of early stuff so that you don't fall behind and you can, snowball yourself, there is space in the format for expensive cards, especially expensive cards that can recover when you're on the back foot, to have a place. Convoke also, as with battles, can lead to the game going a little bit longer because sometimes instead of attacking, you'll use your creatures for mana to convoke something out. And that's, again, just giving your opponent a little bit of life. Obviously, Convoke is a lot better on instance because then you can use a creature to block or threaten to block, and then also effectively use it for mana. So just something to think about when you're building a deck with a lot of Convoke is think about, when you're going to be convoking, when you're going to be casting your spells, whether you want to give up damage. Basically, like if you have a Convoke deck with a lot of instants, then you're going to want to have and prioritize cheap creatures, but you're also going to be planning to have some turns where you just kind of hang back and play defense, then cast your instants. So just think about what that's going to mean in terms of like what your end game looks like and where you're going with this Convoke. Like if you're curving out and then you stop attacking your opponent, what happens when they just cast their more expensive spells than you? Why are you winning that long game? There are plenty of ways to answer that question, but it's just something to keep in mind while you're drafting the Convoke decks. This set has some tribal stuff going on, mostly, if not exclusively, with Phyrexians, and also Knights, and there might be a little bit of other stuff. There's a blue-white Knight Lord and some other Knights Matter stuff, and then there are some cards that are like generically interested in creature types, and some that specifically call out Phyrexians. Overall, I certainly wouldn't think of this as a tribal set, but you do want to pay attention to some of that creature types matters type stuff. Removal in the format, I think, is pretty good. You have Thara's Dispersal is a little bit like cheaper Buried in books. It's 3 to bounce a creature and Surveil 2, but it's only 1 if that creature is attacking. So costs 2 less mana than Buried in books, but puts the creature in your opponent's hand instead of in their library, but you also get to Surveil. Cut Short is another really good, efficient removal spell that plays better in defense. That's 2 and a white for an instant with Convoke. Destroy target Planeswalker that was activated or tapped this turn, or tapped creature. So good defensive removal there. Black has 2 mana instant, slightly better Vicious Offering, -2/-2, or you can sack a creature to give -6/-6. I know Vicious Offering has always impressed me. I assume the black version will also be good. That's Final Flourish. And red Volcanic Spite is the removal spell that's really stood out to me. 2 mana, 3 damage to a creature, planeswalker, or battle, and then you can bottom a card from your hand to draw a card. It's a little rummage type action that doesn't get from your graveyard. And then the big red removal spell is Shatter the Source, which is 6 mana, but it has Convoke, and it's an instant. 6 damage to a creature, planeswalker, or battle, or destroy target artifact. Remarkably close to just killing anything in red for 6 mana, but it's not a real 6 mana. And then green also has good efficient removal in the form of like 2 mana bite spell, Cosmic Hunger. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to another creature, planeswalker, or battle. And then some more stuff at higher rarities. So every color has, that was far from an exhaustive list of removal or anything, just to say that every color does have efficient removal. You know, white has a pacifism type variant and all the stuff you'd expect there. Blue also has like a couple of different auras that, you know, try to answer creatures. Other stuff that I've seen. Oh, I suppose I should probably talk about Incubate. I've generally been pretty impressed with Incubate, especially things that incubate for high numbers. There are a bunch of like enchantments and stuff that like incubate 4 through 6 or 4 or 5 usually, and then give you some kind of ability related to your Phyrexians or transforming or whatever. And while, you know, there are things that punish tokens, like the blue bounce spell that I talked about before, as well as Temporal Cleansing, which is a blue sorcery for 4 mana with Convoke that puts a thing on the second from the top or on the bottom of its owner's library. There are some things that are good answers to the tokens, but for the most part, you know, they're like, you're not getting 2-for-1 or whatever, right? Like your opponent still spent a card and you're you know, down 1 object. Sometimes it might be a little bit more efficient or whatever, but it's not, you know, devastating. And the large-ish tokens, whatever they're incubate tokens, Phyrexian tokens, you know, they're big creatures, they fight well. And the decks that make a bunch of those things and trigger some of those enchantments a bunch or get value out of those enchantments a bunch. I have not explored it super deeply, but the like red black sacrifice space seems very well supported. A lot of different like ways to sack things and minor triggers. Threaten specifically is not the main payoff here because the red steal a creature that exists in the set is an uncommon. I think a lot of it is just kind of, you know, generating like damage and a bit of generic value, I guess. Can't really speak to that in detail at this point. I would say that my best decks so far have been in the blue-white knight aggro convoke space, I think. I tried really to prioritize like 1 and 2 drops as much as possible while drafting that deck, and I liked the results, but I did find it difficult to get as many as I wanted, even when I was prioritizing them, which is to say I would continue prioritizing them, but I might not expect to be able to have kind of the like super low curves that I think you could sort of count on in Brothers War and Phyrexial Obi-Wan. I think that in general it is harder. I think there are just fewer cards, fewer good cards that cost like 1 or 2 mana in this set than there were in Brothers War and Phyrexial Obi-Wan, which will have the effect of slowing the format down just because, you know, even if you want to have a lower curve and a faster deck, you simply won't have the option most of the time. Another thing that's going to, you know, substantially inform the like overall pace of the game and the amount of time that you have to do your stuff. One lesson that I learned the hard way: Phyrexian Censor, that's 2 and a white for a 3/3 Phyrexian wizard. Each player can't cast more than 1 non-Phyrexian spell each turn, and non-Phyrexian creatures enter the battlefield tapped. Watch out for this one, because your battles are probably not Phyrexian spells, and if you cast a battle and then immediately attack the battle, and then defeat the battle, you will be asked to cast the other side of the battle. However, The Phyrexian Censor will not allow you to do that, and your battle will simply be exiled. So be careful if you are playing against a Phyrexian Censor to avoid killing your battles the turn that you play them. Also, some decks are very heavily Phyrexian, and most decks are not. So, Phyrexian Censor is, I think, pretty good against a large number of opponents. And, worst case, assuming it's not hurting you much because you're mostly Phyrexian, you get a 3/3 for 3. So, strong uncommon. Blue, the uncommon I want to point out is Artistic Refusal. This is the 6 mana Convoke, choose one or both, counter target spell, draw 2 cards, then discard a card. Multiple viewers have compared it to Sublime Epiphany with Convoke. Obviously, its actual impact on a game is not as dramatic as Sublime Epiphany. However, if you are playing somewhat defensively, it is pretty easy to hold this up, and counter a spell, draw a card is a pretty big swing. So I've been very happy with Artistic Refusal. I think it's a pretty good card. Another Convoke card uncommon that I've liked a lot is Astral Wingspan. This is the 5 mana Convoke enchant creature. When it ETBs, draw a card, enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and flying. The Convoke decks in particular are pretty good at like going wide and having creatures that don't really matter, and +2/+2 and flying makes basically anything matter. You don't really have to worry about like getting blown out because you are putting it on an object that you didn't invest a lot in to begin with, and this has replaced itself, and with Convoke it's not as expensive as it looks, so pretty good card all around. I don't have a ton of experience with the black uncommons. I think most of the uncommon battles are pretty good. That includes, like the 5 mana fight battle and deal 3 battle in black, fight battle in green. I think that both 6 mana black uncommons, Merciless Repurposing, and Phyrexian Gargantua, Merciless Repurposing being 6 mana instant, exile creature, incubate 3, and Gargantua being 6 mana 4/4, ETB, lose 2, draw 2. I think these are both like pretty good. I don't think that they're too slow for the format. Like I said, I think that while you want cheap stuff, the game goes long enough that you can use these things, and they are both pretty powerful effects. Red uncommons, I would say the standouts for me have been Furnace Gremlin. That's 1 in red for a 1/2 Phyrexian Gremlin. You can spend 1 in a red to give it +1/+0 until end of turn, and when it dies, incubate X, where X is its power. They're just, a lot of. It's not hard for this creature to trade. There are a bunch of X1s that are reasonably interested in getting into combat, and then if you ever have mana up, it trades with whatever, and then leaves you a, bigger incubator the more you have to pump it. And, when you're looking for sacrifice value and everything, really just great with what Red's trying to do, as well as just being a good card on its face. And then Stoke the Flames, of course. It's great. That's a reprint. 4 mana, Convoke, deal 4 to any target. Sandstalker Moloch is green 4/2 flash for 1 GG. This is part of the cycle of cards that are functional against anyone, but at their best against enemy colors. Every time I've played against this, it seemed like my opponent has effortlessly triggered it. I've maybe just been drafting blue too much, but it's been good against me. Invasion of New Capenna. Most of the battles are pretty good. Invasion of New Capenna is exceptionally cheap. It costs only white-black. When it enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice an artifact or creature. When you do, exile target artifact or creature an opponent controls. This is a Rites of Oblivion, but instead of flashback, it is the battle with a backside that is an equipment that is only 1 mana to equip, and whenever equipped creature attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on that creature and each other creature you control that shares a type with it. So really exceptional if you have a bunch of Phyrexians, for example. Really great card on the front and back for only 2 mana. I've seen this going later than I would. Oh, I've seen it going late enough that I was frustrated that I couldn't take it because I wasn't white-black. Kind of the way that gold cards are going to go, but I do think that Invasion of New Capenna is a card that I'd be reasonably happy to take very early in a draft as a reason to go white-black, which is not the case for a lot of the uncommon battles. And that really covers my first impressions so far. A lot of it is kind of what I expected from just kind of the general, like the mechanics of the set, more than the cards in particular. Of course, the fact that I expected this and then have seen it isn't really strong evidence that, like, I was right, because I'm not working off of any data. I'm only working off of my own experiences. And, I was drafting for, like, based on my expectations and then seeing how those played out. And, like, it would be possible, I guess, to have had a set of experiences that convinced me that I was wrong about all that. But for the most part, it would be difficult in one day. I suppose it is worth noting also that because there are a bunch of creatures that you can spend mana to transform them into Phyrexians, as well as a bunch of incubation tokens that you can spend mana to turn into creatures, it is a lot easier to spend mana in the late game than it was in some other sets. Most notably, Phyrexial Obi-Wan is a set that was very, very low on mana sinks, and as a result, spheres, which were kind of horrible to have to play early in that format, were like your way of dealing with flood. Another way in which this set is really different from Phyrexia Obi-Wan is that it's really easy to find stuff to spend your mana on going late, which allows you to build decks that want to play a late game and then take advantage of those mana sinks. So I do think that while this set has some amount of danger of being snowbally, I think it's going to be a significant departure in a lot of ways from what we've seen with Phyrexia Obi-Wan. So, all of that said, let's turn it over to chat for questions. So, as I said, we're now about 9.5 hours into a stream, so I think several viewers have already been watching a lot of my drafts. Maybe some here from other channels have watched some other players. People are free to ask questions informed by what you've seen. I'll just make sure to give anyone listening who hasn't seen it a bit of background on any such questions. So yeah, hit me with your best shot. What would it take for me to pick/play a battle? I would have to see a good battle in a pack. Many of them are good. I think that I mentioned this at some point earlier, that I think people want to talk about battles as if they're all one thing, and they are not. The question about, how highly do you value battles is, I guess there's something coherent about the question, how highly do you value creatures? Or how highly do you value enchantments? Like, there are ways that you can address those questions in meaningful ways, but for the most part, each card should be evaluated on its own merits. Some decks will be better at flipping battles, and some will be worse. But early in a draft, you will often need to decide whether you want to battle before you know what your deck is. So I would say, the individual battles range in power level. Mentioned you would like most of the 1-drops. Does Placid Rottentail seem to have a role to play in this format in green, or is it too bad on rate? So Placid Rottentail is a 1/1 vigilance for 3, and then when it's in your graveyard, you can spend 3 mana and exile it from your graveyard to put 2+1/+1 counters on target creature as a sorcery. It is also a very cute fungus rabbit. The biggest problem with Placid Rottentail is that it is neither in the Jeskai colors, which seem to be where the Convoke is, nor is it in red-black, which is where most of the sacrifice value stuff is. However, green-black, or green does have Surveil, so there are some amount of graveyard matters things, and there are a handful of cards that mill. I would not want to play Placid Rottentail if my plan was to self-mill as in blue-black, so yet another color pair that Placid Rottentail isn't in. I wouldn't want to play Placid Rottentail if my plan was always just to like put it into play and then try to find a way to like trade off with it or chump block with it and then use it for my graveyard. But if I had reason to believe that I was placing it directly in my graveyard some portion of the time, or if I had a lot of Convoke, I could see playing with it. Or a lot of ways to put counters on it. It is, Vigilance is a decent keyword to stack counters on. So, yeah, it does look like it's primarily intended for green-white counters decks as a good like place to put counters and then a source of more counters. And then it's also going to let you convoke your white's convoke stuff there. So probably pretty good in green-white. Probably not a card you want to play if your deck isn't, specifically looking for this sort of thing for some reason. I suspect green-white sounds like the primary place where you're going to end up playing with it. With so many mana sinks, could it be right or for more than the usual number of decks to play 18 lands and try to hit land drops really consistently? Yes. Yes, it could. Given how important curving out is, the more the format is about curving out, the less it means that it's really like more of a tempo format than an attrition format, especially because tempo translates directly to value via battles. And in general, the more a format is tempo, the more you want high lands, whereas the more the format is attrition, the more you want low lands. That's not necessarily clear and obvious because it gets muddled a lot by the fact that curve dictates land count more than the tempo attrition spectrum, but that is a true thing still. And so between that fact and the mana sinks, I could certainly see this being a Highland format, or at least supporting Highland decks. How impactful are the multiverse legends? Comparable to other bonus sheets, commons still offer the primary texture to the set, but there are certainly some powerful cards that can swing games, and then also some kind of filler cards that just like go around the table a bit and act sort of like normal cards in the set. Do any of the archetypes look like they don't really come together that well? I have not studied each of the archetypes in sufficient detail to say, to be honest. Do I have any bomb encounters? Yes, I lost to Ragavan. It would have been easy to deal with Ragavan via blocking, except my opponent also had Tetsuko Umezawa, so it was unblockable. I think that is just always going to be the case. In every limited set, there are bombs, and the bombs that exist win some portion of the games that they show up in. That portion is usually around 62 to 72% of the time. What influence do you see the companions having, and which do you think are worth building around? The impact of companions in limited is significantly lower post companion nerf. They are now playable, but not super impressive. I tried drafting Umori just for fun and to see how it goes, and it went very badly. I drafted Yorion and did not companion it. I think that there may be some, decks that companion well. I think Loris is a card with a really high ceiling, but I haven't, seen what the Loris decks end up looking like in this format specifically. Overall, I don't think companions are going to have a huge impact on this format, but I think that players who enjoy drafting around companions will have the opportunity to do so, and that they will have a win rate that is not particularly exceptional relative to, having a different good card. Cards that went down in evaluation. Most of the ones that went down in evaluation were cards that I misread, so I don't know how useful those are to list. It's not like I misread them in ways where like I would expect other people to read them in the same ways. There were just cards that didn't do what I thought they did, and sometimes they did worse things, and sometimes they did better things. A lot of appealing gold sheet rares, etc. Should players be less willing to commit to colors early and the fixing, support, pivoting, splashing? I don't know that the set is like wildly different than most other sets in terms of like incentive to splash. I think that splashing and pivoting are both supported in normal amounts. Like I think that curving out is important. Having a stable mana base is important to do that. Powerful incentives can justify playing extra colors. I don't think that Skittering Surveyor is going to be picked as highly as it was in original Dominaria. Our level of cards in this set is higher, so Skittering Surveyor is not as good, relatively speaking, just on raw power level, and therefore it'll go a little bit later, and therefore it'll be a little bit easier for people who are looking for it to splash when they need to. So as far as like, should you commit less in anticipation of this stuff? Like with anything, only commit as much as you're getting paid to commit. Are uncommon battles overall worth it to play? Yes. A majority of the uncommon battles are playable. I think sealed is more or less favorable to companioning Yorion. More? But like, the reason that I think sealed is more favorable to companioning Yorion is that there's no opportunity cost to attempting and failing to companion Yorion. Like, with sealed, you just look at what your deck is with Yorion and look at it without Yorion and decide which one's better. With draft, you have to decide whether you're like trying to companion Yorion or not. And if you are, you have to like take some spells over some lands so that you have like enough spells to get to your playable number, and like not prioritize sideboard cards so that you can have more main deck cards. And then like maybe your colors aren't open and you find out somewhere halfway through the draft that you're not actually going to get to companion Yorion, and some of your picks were suboptimal for the non-Yorion deck. So like there is a cost to attempting to Yorion that exists in draft that doesn't exist in sealed, and therefore there's a lower cost to like maybe companioning Yorion in sealed. Does combat matter? Yes. This is limited. Combat and how you block always matters in limited, and battles substantially increase how much it matters. Could counterspells be better in this format due to them being better concealed through incubate tokens, and they could be good answers in a bomb-heavy format? And on top of all that, you can counter the backside of a battle, which is not as good as countering the front side of the battle, but is sometimes something that you can anticipate in terms of like knowing, oh, this is a thing that they're going to cast and I'm going to want to counter it. Yes, there are instant speed mana sinks, and that helps counter spells. On the other hand, it's worth noting that there are also sorcery speed mana sinks that where sometimes people spend their turn activating their transform abilities on their creatures instead of casting spells. And if you pass for the counterspell hoping to counter your opponent's use of mana that turn, and then they just transform a creature instead, you won't have an opportunity to use your counterspell, which will make it worse than normal. So I don't know. Counterspells are fine. Land cycling, common cycle seems strong. Thoughts on these? Spending mana to land cycle does suck. I do like cards that can, both fix and be high impact, and cards that like help if you have low land numbers and high land numbers. But spending 2 mana to find a land is very much a failure state. I think that the cards are fine. I think that you shouldn't play all of them that you have access to. I think that sometimes you will draft them and they won't make your deck, even if you are playing their colors. But they do add a nice bit of consistency in fixing when that's what you're looking for. Question about a heuristic for evaluating how much a battle's defense impacts the value, like your evaluation of the strength of the battle relative to like what you get for defeating it. No, I don't have a heuristic. It's very much just like all the cards, all the contexts are different. Play with them a little bit, and you'll get a sense of which battles are good. Every number on a magic card matters, but like most numbers aren't directly translatable to other numbers. Yeah, there's not a simple answer for that one. Or how do you think the differences between draft and sealed play out in this set, specifically curving out and color splashing? I think that curving out is just fundamentally important in a format with battles and convoke. So that will be true in sealed and in draft. Like cheap creatures are going to be better in the sealed format than they are in some sealed formats. Splashing is like you'll know exactly what you can get for your splashes. Playing your powerful cards is, always good if you can get away with it in sealed. I think that there will be more 3-color decks in sealed than in draft. That's not really surprising, or like that's not a hot take. That's just kind of how sealed goes. I don't have special insight on sealed in this format, having not played any of it. This is more of a 2-drops or vital format like last set, or a low priority, say Kami. 2-drops are vital. Talk about the vehicle that taps for mana. Do only specific types of decks want this card? I think that this is the 2-mana 3/2 vigilance through 1 that taps to add mana of any color, if and only if it's a creature. Flywheel Racer. So this is like a 2-colorless Jaspera Sentinel that is a 3/2 vehicle, but you're basically tapping this and another creature to add a mana that is a mana creature instead of a 1-mana creature that's a mana creature. Obviously, spending more mana for your mana creatures is really bad, but being colorless rather than green is a big deal. And I like this thing if you have a lot of 1-drops, but it's not trivial to have a lot of 1-drops in this set. I think Flywheel Racer is like very good if you have like 4+1s. But while I would be happy to have 4 or more 1s in a lot of decks, I don't think that you're going to succeed at getting that in a lot of decks. And so I don't think that you should prioritize Racer unless you like really need the fixing until you have a bunch of 1-drops already. Mentioned exploring in the blue-white convoke space. Should you only look to play high-impact convoke cards, or will any convoke cards at all suffice? Card Halo Hopper does not appear upon first impression to be high impact. Halo Hopper is another one that's largely a function of how many 1s you have. Like, if you can actually cast it on turn 2, it's pretty good. I don't think that Halo Hopper is a priority. I do think that like how impactful is this card isn't the primary thing that I'm looking at with convoke cards. Like, +2/+2 and Flying Trick is generally a low impact card, but I think it's a good convoke card. You do want to think about like, so what's going on with the convoke deck is you're trying to balance your enablers, which is just any creature, but ideally cheap creatures and creatures that make tokens, and your payoffs, which are things that have convoke, which are going to be expensive creatures or spells of any sort that have convoke. And then those spells aren't helping you convoke other stuff. So you can't afford to play too many spells with convoke, because if you draw all convoke spells and not creatures, then you just have a bunch of overcosted cards that suck. So you need to figure out like what's the greatest number of convoke cards that you can play, and then you want to play the better ones and not the worst ones. And that's where you get into this like high impact thing, where you need to be, a little choosy about your convoke cards, just because your deck only gets so many convoke cards because you need the rest of it to be creatures. And, the removal and stuff that you're playing basically cuts into your convoke cards slots, because each of those also makes your other convoke cards worse. So in that way, you do want your convoke cards to be high impact. You want them to just like be good. Halo Hopper is different than the other convoke stuff in that it is both a payoff, a card with convoke, and an enabler, a cheap creature. So Halo Hopper is good if you are like very convokey. If you have like a lot of token creatures, a lot of 1-drops, you're going to be able to like get it into play without tapping a lot of mana, and then you're going to be able to use that to cast other spells, awesome. Otherwise, I think Halo Hopper isn't a great rate, so it needs like an exceptional reason to be playable, and that would qualify, if you have like a lot of good setup and payoff for convoking. All right, that's going to wrap it up. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and I will be back less than a week from now on Wednesday to record my first archetype breakdown. I certainly don't know which archetype I will be talking about at this point, but I will by then. This, of course, as usual, I will not be using a poll to decide the archetype for the first episode. That'll just be whatever I feel like I have enough experience to talk about, and we will go from there. So thanks for listening, everyone. I hope you're excited to get to play with this new set, and I'll be back soon. Bye for now.
Prepare for light speed.